important to them, just to sort of the common experience of what it meant to be a furry. And one of the things that kept coming up was that a lot of these furries had been to clinical psychologists. They would go to a clinical psychologist with depression or with other problems in their life. And as soon as they mentioned that they were furry, the clinical psychologist would say, "Oh, that's the problem," and would latch onto that and try to cure the furry. This had a lot of really unfortunate implications, including a lot of furries simply walked out of the clinician's office and never looked back. As a result of this, knowing that this is the case, we wrote an open letter to several now clinical psychological journals, saying, "Hey, look, here's what furries are. Here's what we're." All right. All right. Suddenly in the YouTube video, there's going to be a strange cut where we're both into the camera. All right, so last time on Nuka talks about science. Yes. So the research does suggest that local meets are an important part of the average furry's experience. 35% of furries say that they attend some kind of local meets, and about 25% say they regularly attend weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings, monthly meetings, these sorts of things. In terms of convention attendance, about 25% of furries say they have never attended a furry convention. Put another way, about 75% of furries say they have attended at least one convention, and about half of all furries say they attend at least one convention a year. So this suggests that for many furries, the experience of going to a convention is a very important and crucial component of being a furry to them. Oh yes. I'm waiting for someone to laugh at PAPCon. Some people will laugh at. Really? No one gets. No one.
We get it. We just don't laugh.
I thought it was hilarious. Cut that part out of the YouTube.
What is PAP spelled backwards?
Yeah. So for those who don't know, PAPCon was the name of the fictional furry convention in the Fur and Loathing. Las Vegas. CSI episode.
Season 4.
Yeah.
Episode 3.
All right, moving along. My failed. The jokes are much funnier when you have to explain them. So furries and the internet. The internet is a huge part of furry fandom. About 80% of furries regularly use online furry forums, and about 40% say they use them daily. This ranges from for affinity to various art sites. Weasel apparently is becoming more popular here.
So furry.
So furry, local furry boards and stuff like that, like the Ontario Fur Boards for myself. 80% of furries use instant messaging programs, and about 55% of them use these instant messaging programs daily. This could be everything from artists using Skype, people who are using sort of some kind of live streaming program, to Messenger, which I guess is on its way out.
But I'm sure you probably find that data set to be pretty contemporary across all of them.
I suspect that wouldn't be unique to furries, yeah. Possibly, I'll explain that caveat later. About 40% of furries have used IMVU or Second Life, and 15 to 20% of it, 20% of those furries say that they use it at least a few times a week. So I will admit to not being one of these furries. I have no idea. I typed Second Life in furries, and this is what I got. I don't know if that's anything that you recognize, but... So what are fursonas? We've had around the term fursona a few times. Some furries have heard the term fursona already. What exactly is this fursona that I'm talking about? Put one way, it's an anthropomorphic animal representation or avatar. For myself, this is Courtney, the grad students. This is Nuka, the science cat. The thing. Typically, a fursona is a representation. Right. Are you guys coming in, or people trying to get in?
Should I tell them to keep quiet out there?
If they want to come in, great. If not, I might ask them to.
It's hard to hear.
Politely.
Please don't stand around this floor and be loud. Either if you're coming in, come in.
That's almost politely, but not
Almost polite. Politeness fail.
All right.
Yeah, we could just close the door.
Anyway. So, personas are a representation, either sort of the way you want to be seen to the fans. This is the face that you want other furries to see you by, or others in your life in general, your family, your friends. Some furries decide this isn't just how they want to be seen by the fandom, but how they want to be seen by people in day-to-day life. For some furries, a persona is how they see themselves. It's actually when you look in a mirror, when you reflect on it, this is how you see yourself. This is the truest image of yourself. Statistics on fursonas. About half of furries have only ever had one fursona. This is the number of fursonas you've had in your life and the number of furries who say they've had that. Yeah, about half of furries say they've only ever had one. And the vast majority of furries say 1, 2, possibly 3. This suggests, that for furries, fursona isn't just something you decide, today I'm going to be a fan. Typically it's something that takes some time, some effort. It typically involves putting some part of yourself into it. I should also note, hopefully preempting a question or two, that this doesn't take into account the fact that some of these are held simultaneously. Some furries, when they say 2 fursonas, it means they have 2 that they switch between regularly. It doesn't necessarily mean that they had them one after another.
Why is there such a large jump in 10?
Because 10 plus also means 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, all the way up to 10,000. Yeah.
1 million.
I mean, it's a big jump because it's taking everything that would go all the way out there and condensing it into one bar. So
I wouldn't think that a lot of people would have multiple.
there are some people who say I have hundreds of fursonas.
You don't know sheep dark.
It does happen. And again, for those folks, a fursona might mean something different than a person who say has only ever had one fursona. For me, Nuka is the only fursona I've ever had. He's something very deep and personal to me. It has significance. If I had, say, 30, 40, or 50 fursonas, different ones for whatever mood I was in, it may not have as much significance or not be as much symbolism in that as perhaps in a person who had only one fursona. So to the folks who haven't attended this panel before, what's the most popular fursona species?
Wolf.
Wolf or fox. And the wolves take it. With the caveat, I don't know if you guys can read this. This is by fursona species, and this is sort of the number of furries. About 14% of furries are hybrids, and about 14% of furries are wolves.
I made the list.
Followed closely by fox, dog, big cat, which I'll break down in a second, dragons, mythical, which I'll break down, cats, etc., 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 the list goes on. But you can see that the fandom, there tends to be some species which are gravitated towards more in the fandom. Most people in this room could probably fire off some derivation of some of these if they were asked to predict. Among hybrids, it tends to be a mix of sort of the top popular species. Dog, wolf, fox, wolf, dragon, wolf, cat, fox, tiger, wolf. So some combination, mix and match of the top 4 or 5 species. Among dogs, huskies, perhaps no surprise, are the most popular species, followed closely by German Shepherd. Some people just said dog and didn't specify beyond that. Big cats, we have tigers, lions, snow leopards, cheetahs, etc., etc., etc. Mythical animals, Pokemon. Sorry, Griffins. Every Griffin out there is rolling their eyes at Pokemon. So why fursona? So why is it that furries decide to have these furry anthropomorphic avatars?
Because we're furries.
Can we stop actually with all the side comments? Because I'm a little hard of hearing. If we can just limit it
Sure.
a bit. Thank you so much.
All right, yeah, maybe keep it down, limit, I guess, to just serious questions. Pardon me?
Like chapter breaks?
Yeah, sure, okay.
Thank you so much.
Not a problem. All right. So, why fursonas? Why is it that furries decide to adapt these fursonas? One reason is for communal norm. When a furry first gets into the fandom, they look around them to see, well, what do other furries do? And they see the vast majority of furries have a fursona, so you do what other people do. This is one reason why. There are other reasons, though, to adapt a fursona. One being because you have particular admiration or reverence for a particular species. Maybe you really like wolves, and you decided, well, I'll adapt a wolf fursona because I like wolves. A sense of self-expression. There are those who say there's some aspect of me that's just not expressed by a human, but it's expressed by a wolf form, by the spirit of something else. A third way is ideal self. So perhaps a fursona is a way to sort of say, this is what I would be if I could. If only I could, I would be this. And particularly with that last idea, this idea of self-enhancement. A fursona sort of is a way of self-enhancement, making yourself better. And we do have a little bit of evidence to suggest that this might be the case. When asking about whether or not your species is a predator or prey species, predator species are 3 to 4 times more likely to be chosen than prey species. If you're going to identify with a species, you may be better off identifying with one that's near the top of the food pyramid. That's not to say, of course, that there aren't plenty of furries who identify with personas as both predator and prey, or that they say it's neither predator nor prey. They don't think with the persona that way. There's also research that suggests that the more you identify, the closer you feel to your fursona species, the more likely it is that you've chosen a predator species. One of my favorite findings here is the finding, and again this idea of self-enhancement, that your persona makes you feel better about yourself, is the research that suggests that whatever your species is, regardless of what your species is more masculine than all the other species, but somehow also more feminine than the other species. It's more sociable than the other species, it's more fun than all the other species, it's more admirable than the other species, and it's less aggressive, it's not a jerk like those other species. This is regardless, this is regardless of what species you actually are. So the species you've chosen tends to be a species that you tend to like, and the more you identify with that, the more you're sort of taking on those traits that are likable. But our persona is actually self-enhancing. Do we have any evidence that shows that this somehow makes you a better person or improves you? Again, our evidence suggests perhaps yes. So, for those who have a little bit of a background in psychology, one of the commonly held theories in psychology is that there's 5 big factors in personality: extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, emotional stability, and how open you are to experience. So this last column right here, we asked furries about the non-persona self. Rate yourself on these traits based on who you are when you're not in your persona. And they gave us some numbers. Great. We compared this to established norms, what a whole bunch of, what the research suggests, a whole bunch of college students say. And you find that on most of these, furries are quite lacking. Furries are a lot less extroverted, furries are a lot less agreeable, furries not in their persona are a lot less conscientious, they're a lot less emotionally stable, and they tend to be about on average in terms of openness to experience. Okay, so furries may be a little lower on these things. What about your fursona? When we asked about your fursona, this fursona that you put on, that you act as in at least some contexts, the fursonas were much more close to these established norms. Fursonas actually made furries more extroverted, more agreeable, higher in conscientiousness, higher in emotional stability, somehow less open to experience. Not quite sure. But that said, this isn't low. This is a little less high. So there's evidence here to suggest at least that having a persona may have this stabilizing effect on one's personality, or a normalizing effect on it. Question?
What's the scale?
I believe the scale in this case is a 7-point scale. Yeah. 6 or 7-point scale. I don't recall whether it's 6 or 7. I don't remember which one we used for this one. But yeah. So do personas matter? So there's some evidence to suggest that maybe a persona has this self-enhancing effect, but do furries really care what their personas are? Do I really care that he's a wolf? Do I really care that he's a fox? In general, no. Furries tend to say that a persona doesn't influence, what your persona is doesn't really influence whether or not I'm going to get along with you. So only 3.15 out of 10. So furries tend to say, it doesn't really matter what your persona is, I'll still get along with you. That said, furries do tend to say that it provides some information about who you are. So it may not just change whether I'm going to interact with you, but the fact that you chose a wolf says something about who you are as a person. And they do believe this. So that's the individual furry. What about furries gathering in groups? What do furries in groups do? What can we say about the fandom? Well, first of all, let's ask how one actually gets into this fandom. Contrary to what this comic says, Hunter chases after a cougar, cougar attacks Hunter, Hunter's about to shoot cougar, Cupid shoots Hunter, and then Hunter winds up at a furry convention.
Wearing the cougar skin.
That's not actually how furries. That's not actually how furries get into the fandom. So the most popular ways that seem to be cited are that it was something outside, some outside influence or inspiration that led you to these furry ideas. This could be things like popular media, artwork of some sort. The artwork of some particular artist kind of inspired these feelings in you. Having a pet or animal that you felt particularly close to, or you feel like you just understand them or get them. A trip to the zoo or some other experience where you interacted or saw animals and it kind of triggered something in you. But there's also internal influences or a sense of revelation. Something happened that made you just realize this. It could be an epiphany that you had, like just one day something just kind of clicked. A sense of self-discovery. You know, maybe you went on some kind of spiritual journey, or you just spent a lot of time meditating, introspecting, and this sort of came to you. Or a spiritual experience of some sort. Perhaps it was something spiritual that led you to this idea. A lot of Therians reports, sorry, you don't know what the Therian is yet, I'll get to that. But this ever-present feeling, a lot of people report that it's just something that was always in me. I just always was this. I can't remember a time when I didn't feel this feeling inside of me that I sort of identified with or had this connection to this animal species. We do find among the top 10 influences, furries, we ask furries what led to you becoming a furry. The internet and artwork, which are two external sources, were number 1 and 2, but number 3 was a feeling inside of me. Something about inside of me led me to this fandom. And indeed, we find 20 to 25% of furries say it was something within me, about 30 to 35% of furries say it was something outside of me, and about 40 to 45% of furries say some combination of both. So that's what sort of gets furries into furry and into the furry fan, but what keeps them coming back? And our research suggests this is definitely not true. Well, things that furries tend to report that they like about the fandom and sort of keeps them coming back. It provides a sense of belongingness. So the higher bars here mean that a lot of furries agree with it. So a sense of belongingness. It provides them with a sense of escape. The real world kind of sucks, and the furry fandom's kind of fun. The furry fandom's kind of fun. We're kind of scattered on attention. Some folks say that it definitely provides me with a sense of attention, and I like that. Others say, I hate that sense of attention, and I want no part of it. That has no bearing on me being in the fandom. Sex, mixed bag. There are definitely some who say for sure, and there are definitely some who say absolutely not. You can't really say for sure which one, that is definitely one or the other. It's very, very mixed. What keeps furries coming back? So it's the same as with many groups. A sense of belonging or group identity. They're all holding giant crayons, by the way, if you can't see this. So it provides them with a sense of belonging, and that's what keeps them coming back. It's fun. It provides a sense of social support. These are things that are not just unique to furries. A lot of groups provide these things for people. Anything from car clubs to being a fan of particular science fiction or anime. But there's something sort of a little more idiosyncratic or a little more specific to furries. Not necessarily unique, but more specific. Namely, an appreciation for aesthetics, specifically artwork or an attraction for some kind of art within the fandom. Or a sense of inclusiveness and acceptance, which you don't find in a lot of other fandoms. In particular in furry, this is quite a strong feeling, people report. Why do furries leave? So this is what got furries into it, why they stay, but why do they leave? We don't actually have a lot of good answers on this. We're still working on this data right now, primarily because it's hard to, if you go to furry conventions and furry websites, it's hard to get a sample of furries who aren't in the fandom. We have a few working hypotheses, though. The first one being the life happens hypothesis. If you have kids, if you have a family, if you get married, sometimes you just don't have enough time to make it out to a convention, and over time, it just kind of life happens and you don't have time anymore. This is one of our hypotheses that we're going to be testing in the future. The fandom just ain't what it used to be. Some folks recognize this logo. This is the Burn Fur logo. The life ain't what it used to be idea is this idea that when you got into the fandom, there were a certain set of memes, there were a certain set of ideas and series and things that were popular. And 10, 20 years, as new people come into the fandom, it's a very different place. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there were far fewer conventions. The internet played a less prominent part in being a furry. There were a very different set of furry artists. Things like streaming with artists and stuff definitely didn't happen. To a furry who got in around that time and who looks at the fandom now, it's a very different place. And it can actually make the fandom feel very alienating, and a lot of times that can be enough to drive a person out of the fandom. The third one, my favorite hypothesis, and the one that I'm sort of feel the most strongly about, and hope to be true, is the scaffold hypothesis. So the scaffold hypothesis is this idea that the furry fandom serves a function for people. Belonging to the fandom provides you with a sense of belonging, provides you with all these good things. Perhaps this is the only time you get to make it and hang out with friends, or perhaps this is the place where you're the most extroverted. But after time, after spending time in the fandom, perhaps you start to develop that sense of friendship. Perhaps you start to get more practice being extroverted, and after a while, you don't really need the fandom for that anymore. You've developed social skills, you've got a circle of friends, you sort of figured out who you are as a person, and the fandom, not providing any of these functions anymore, just kind of becomes less important to you now. So these are sort of three of the hypotheses that we're going to be testing with this new longitudinal study that we're hoping to start running here. Hopefully we'll catch furries as they're leaving. I mean, we don't want furries to leave the fandom, but if they're leaving the fandom, hopefully we can find out, well, you know, what's causing you to leave the fandom? Can we just find out, you know, what is it that's driving furries to leave the fandom? Maybe possibly explain some of these age differences in the fandom.
I know one who's left.
So, pardon?
I know one who's left.
One is that?
But she left because,
We want to avoid anecdotes. We want to avoid anecdote.
okay,
Right.
I'm sorry.
No worries. We can talk afterwards, perhaps. But
What is longitudinal and what other studies do you have?
I'll get to other studies later. But just for a quick note, longitudinal study is when we don't just do one survey, but we keep tracking you over and over and over a period of time, and we watch how your answers change over time. And we see within the same person, do they change over time in a predictable way? So what is the furry fandom? So I'm saying all these things about what keeps you in the fandom, but what is it actually at its heart? What makes the furry fandom different? So what is it about this stuff right here that makes it fundamentally different from this stuff? People who are fans of this stuff.
It goes from the age cartoons to that. Really?
I want to argue that it's because furry fandom is primarily a participatory fan culture. This is based on work by Henry Jenkins, who's a media psychologist or media researcher, and he says that the active content creators, right? Furries are active content creators from their very induction into the fandom. From day one in the fandom, you create a persona. It starts with the act of creation, and from that point on, furries create content for the fandom. Whether you're commissioning an artist to create something or you're creating your own material, furries are all actively involved in creating the content that we pass around. This is very different. This is very decentralized and very different from other fandoms, such as these ones. In the Star Wars fandom, one guy gets to decide what things tend to be canon and what things aren't. In the Harry Potter fandom, one person decides what thing is and what's canon and what's not. Same thing with bands and stuff. Bands get to decide. You know, bands are the only source of creativity within that fandom, and the fans kind of actively or passively consume that material, but they don't actively contribute to it, nearly as much at least, as in the furry fandom, where everyone tends to contribute in one form or another. To sort of show evidence of this, we find that between 40 and 60% of furries reports saying to at least some extent they consider themselves to be artists. And another 30 to 50% of furries say that they consider themselves to be writers. There are a lot of writers and a lot of artists and a lot of very creative people within this fandom. And this sort of, switching gears a little bit, the furry fandom has its origins in the science fiction and fantasy fandoms. I'm looking to see if any of the gray muzzles sort of recognize some of these references. Alright. The science fiction, or the furry fandom comes primarily out of science fiction fandom, out of spin-offs from science fiction conventions. I'm not going to go into the history of it because there are people who are much better at telling the history of the furry fandom than myself, but suffice it to say, we are primarily an offshoot of the science fiction and fantasy fandom, and indeed it shows in the creativity and the fantasy aspects of furries. Compared to the average American, furries are much more likely to endorse magical thinking, to have engaged in childhood fantasy quite a bit more, to engage in more furry-specific and other non-furry specific fantasies than the average person. And most importantly, this fantasy is what I call functional fantasy. This is fantasy that are things like, I use it for creativity, self-expression, and not things like pathological escapism, where I'm doing terrible at school, so I'm just going to play World of Warcraft.
Yeah. Well, those are 0.001, that's a 1,000th percentage point of difference.
That's a p-value, that's something different.
Yeah.
That's something different, yes. This is statistics. So the content of the furry fandom. What is in the furry fandom? A little bit of everything. Some things tend to be spikes, tend to be things that are quite popular. Art, most furries admit on a 7-point scale. Art is a very important part of the fandom. Community is a very important part of the fandom. Conventions, internet groups, fursuits are up there. Sex and drama are actually quite low on things that are fundamental or considered crucial to the furry fandom, even though perhaps we make jokes about this or reference it quite a bit. I love this chart so much. We asked for, we got a list of things and found out what things furries like, really like, kind of like and dislike. Furries really like science fiction, video games, cartoons, webcomics, artwork. These are perhaps not surprising. A lot of furries like anime, mucks and role-playing, tabletop gaming. Only one thing sort of came out as a clear trend that a lot of furries consistently disliked. Perhaps jocks beat them up in high school. I don't know, but
It goes back to level of education.
I can actually speculate on this a little bit later. I see people taking pictures of this graph now. Popular websites and artists. Most of you can probably rifle off a few of these. Top websites, go ahead and yell some out.
Furry.
Pretty good. You'll also notice that many of these deal in pornographic material of one form or another. Top artists. Fire off some top artists.
Dr. Josh, Eric
It should be pointed out, right, guys? It should be pointed out that even though there are some common trends in artists that tend to be, quite popular, we did have to go through almost 1,150 unique artists or websites to compile this data. So there were a lot of very different things. The fandom is exceptionally decentralized in terms of its content. Are there artists in the room? Raise your hand if you are an artist in this room. We have a few artists in this room. Okay. Artists will hopefully snicker at this. Hopefully this will give pause to the folks who commission artists. Do you ever wonder why your artist is a little pissed off with you? We asked furries about different questions about entitlements. I think that artists are obligated to go above and beyond expectations to fulfill their fans' requests. A lot of furries disagree with that, but a surprising number agreed at least somewhat with this. 10 to 20% of furries say that, yeah, I think artists are obligated to go above and beyond, my expectations. If I email artists, they better email me back. There's a lot of people, 40 to 60% of people strongly, okay, perhaps. The artists that I am a fan of should make special accommodations for me or other fans because we are devoted. You say nope. This is about 5 to 10% of people who say at least somewhat, I agree with this. If you're an artist, you've probably encountered some of that 5 to 10%.
Yeah.
Artists should listen to their fans and to our suggestions. I would let an artist know if I thought their work was subpar or inadequate. Do you ever wonder why your artist might be in a crass mood with you? So what is the furry fandom? So to come to an end of this section, what is the furry fandom? It's an art-centered, participatory fandom that includes, but is not limited, to themes from traditional science fiction and fantasy with sort of an anthropomorphic focus. And it contains many subcultures within it. Here's a whole bunch of different subcultures within the furry fandom, and this is sort of how people liked them. Artists quite liked, writers, musicians, suitors, all quite liked. Vampires, maybe because Twilight came out or something. Baby furs and Nazi furs. Baby furs were hated almost as much as Nazi furs.
I don't see bronies there.
I'll get to bronies. What are furry subcultures? There are many subcultures within the furry fandom. I'm going to talk about two of them. I have on previous occasions talked about baby furs. I haven't done a lot of study on baby furs, except to go attend many panels and sort of get a lot of anecdotal data, which is why I'm not going to present that today. But if you talk to me afterwards, I'd be happy to tell you about it. Subcultures within the furry fandom, the two I'll talk about are Therians, who are a subculture based on an attitude or sort of a belief that they have, and bronies, who are a subculture based on a particular content. Starting with Therians, I've given this definition on several occasions. I am not a Therian. This is my best attempt at a definition. I'd be happy to talk with Therians afterwards about revising this, but this is based on our data. Loosely defined, Therians are people who identify either physically, psychologically, or spiritually with or as a token animal species. So, how frequent are these Therians found in the furry fandom? Our data suggests that anywhere from 7 to 20% of the furry fandom, depending on the group that we're talking to, identify as Therians. So this isn't some handful of Therians. This is a non-significant part of our fandom, 6 to 20%. And in terms of what Therians are, among the people who said that they were Therians, they said they were much more likely to say that furry and being a Therian was not a choice for them. This is something that they didn't have a lot of choice over. They reported much more stronger connection felt with their species, their fursona species. They reported that this species, their token species, was a much deeper part of them than furries said about their fursonas, and that they had less choice over their species than furries did. Therians were 2 to 3 times more likely to say that they felt less than 100% human, and this was whether asking about physically less than 100% human or mentally less than 100% human. About half of Therians say they would be 0% human if they could. Sorry, I'm cutting for a second. Oh, good? All right. Oh, sorry. Continuing on. And Therians were also more likely to say that I'm not less than 100% human, I'm 100% human plus some other stuff thrown in. You can see with these bars, compared to non-furs and furries, Therians are much more likely to say that some part of me is best expressed by something decidedly non-human. In terms of asking how much they identify with their fursona species on a 1 to 7 scale, the red bars are Therians, and Therians were much more strongly identifying with their fursona species. And in fact, compared to furries, Therians were stronger on both how much they like their species, how much they identify with their species, and how much there's a felt spiritual connection with their species than were furries. Perhaps most interestingly about Therians, this is the age in which you got into the furry fandom. The blue bars are furries and the red bars are Therians. What you'll notice here is that for the ages, for younger ages, the Therian bars are higher. Therians report feeling that they were feeling this feeling inside of them from a much younger age, on average, than furries do. And for a lot of them, they say, this is as far as I can remember. I felt this way, since I was a baby, or since I had memories. In terms of Therians and animals and their attitudes towards animals, we found in past research that Therians' concept of self, of who I am, is more closely tied to animals and to the concept of animals, cognitively. This is on an implicit measure which can't be faked. This is something that's incredibly difficult to fake. So this isn't just something that Therians say. This is something that, in the way their mind is sort of representing the concept of self in animals, they are closely tied to one another. And we've also found that Therians tend to be more associated with animal rights activism. Some just sort of random facts about furries and Therians and animals. 3% of furries and Therians report being vegetarian currently, and 14% were at one time vegetarian. This did not differ significantly from the general population. 83% of furries, 83% of furries said they supported animal rights, and 7% consider themselves animal rights activists. On the bottom here are Therians, and they did differ significantly. Therians were much more likely to consider themselves animal rights activists and to say that they supported animal rights. This kind of makes sense if you identify with animals. Specific issues that furries and Therians feel strong about are things like displacing animals for land use, using animals for lab research, pain and suffering of animals, wearing animals for fur, and the use of animals for cosmetics testing. In terms of not just identifying with animals, but we also find that Therians consider themselves strong furries as well. They identify quite a bit with furries. The blue bar is furries and how strong you identify as a furry, and Therians identify more strongly with furries than furries on average. So Therians are sort of like furry extreme, like they're stronger furries. We also find the importance of furry in defining who I am as a person. We have the same thing. Therians are much more likely to say this is something really fundamental to who I am. Lest we think that there's something wrong with Therians, or Therians are these crazy people, we found that these are things that furries do not differ from Therians on, in terms of how much they engage in fantasy, in terms of self-esteem, physical health, relationship, and psychological well-being, the extent to which they've developed a coherent sense of identity. Furries and Therians are indistinguishable on these things. So Therians are no more crazy than furries are. You're all laughing because you're saying, well, our furry's crazy. I'll get to that. So in some, Therians aren't defined by some kind of dysfunction. They're not dysfunctional furries. Bronies. Here we go. What percentage of the furries that were at Anthropon called themselves bronies?
25.
33.
Good chunk.
100%.
Oh, 24% of furries say that they are bronies.
That's right.
How do we feel about bronies? The blue bars represent how furries feel towards these groups. The red bars are how bronies feel towards these groups. Furries and furries and bronies both feel about the same towards non-furries, and they both feel about the same pretty positively towards furries. There's a bit of a dip here. Bronies feel quite highly towards bronies. Furries don't.
Furry bronies, right?
Yes, these are all furry brony. These are furries who.
Right, but the bronies.
The bronies are furry bronies. Yes. Asking how do you feel towards bronies? How do furries feel towards bronies? About a third of the fandom thinks bronies are great. About a third of the fandom says they suck, and about 25% of the fandom says, eh. About half of the fandom say, yeah, bronies are a part of the furry fandom, just like anything else. And about a quarter say, there's a little bit of overlap, but they're not the same. And about a quarter say, nothing to do at all with furries. It's something completely different. A comparison. Some people, this is sort of, what is this? Oh, right, yes. Some attitudes that people tend to have towards the brony fandom is that, well, bronies aren't real furries. They're just sort of the newest addition to the furry fandom. They're not in my fandom fallacy. This is the idea that, furry had a great thing going, and then bronies came in and just sort of invaded it and made it awful. The truth is that bronies have actually been around in the furry fandom longer than the average furry has. Significantly longer, statistically significantly longer. The average brony has been furry for 9.4 years. The average non-brony furry has been a furry for 8.3 years. So it's not the case that all these damn young bronies have come in and ruined our fandom. It's from within.
Yes, but are they third-gen bronies?
Not bronies were also likely to say that they were furries at a younger age than were non-brony furries. Reasons that furries give for disliking bronies. 17.4% said that bronies are obnoxious, they're obsessive, they force their culture onto others. I don't know where they get that idea. I don't know where this is coming from. Some say they're just not the same as furries. There's just something about them that's just not furry. A general hatred for them. I don't hate all bronies, just specific bronies. It's unimaginative. They're criticizing on the grounds that it's not this participatory fan culture. You're just letting someone else generate content for them. It's silly. It's dumb. It's immature. Because furries are not immature. So let's compare furries to bronies. Are bronies broken furries? There is a little bit of evidence, some weak evidence to suggest that bronies may have a less defined sense of self than do non-brony furries. Bronies do report having experienced greater bullying in their life. It's most important to note that the greatest difference had to do between the ages of 19 and 24. Probably because they're being bullied for being a brony. Other than these two differences, bronies do not differ significantly from furries on any of our measures, including well-being, self-esteem, relationship, satisfaction, psychological functioning. So bronies are not broken furries. Is it a sex thing? Here we go.
Hold on.
Question, actually.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. Go
The
ahead.
definition of brony, I know it's brony, but did you also include females?
Are you looking for the word Pegasister?
No, I'm just curious if you included them at all in that definition at all.
Yeah, we say brony / Pegasister, but it tends to be the case that a lot of female bronies also adopt the term brony.
Right, I was just curious if they were included in that as well.
Yeah. Female bronies and male bronies alike, yeah.
But why do females call themselves bro?
Because
It's the name of
Pegasus
it.
sounds
Because
dumb.
Pegasister sounds stupid.
It's just like furry.
So, Is it a sex thing? Here we go. This is the one section that makes me nervous to talk about. Okay, we're going to go through 5 myths that exist about the furry fandom. It's a sexual attraction to animals. It's a sexual attraction to stuffed animals. All furries are single, sexless males. Male furries are gay. Male furries are very effeminate males. We'll go through each of these in turn. Okay, bolder terms. The first two we're going to go after: zoophilia and plushophilia. Zoophilia is defined as a sexual attraction to animal skin or animal fur. The incidence of it in the furry fandom, is between 2 and 16% of people in the furry fandom reports feelings of zoophilia. In control samples, non-furries, this is in general population samples, 7.5 to 15% reported feelings of zoophilia. Plushophilia, a sexual attraction to stuffed animals. In the furry fandom, 1 to 11%, depending on which sample you're looking at, reports this feeling of plushophilia. In other control samples, we don't know because this data hasn't been looked at. Before we get there, I'm going to do a caveat and qualify these. There are 2 main problems with these statistics. One is a lack of a consistent definition. When you ask a person if they identify as a zoophile, what does a zoophile mean? Some people take it to mean an attraction to animals. Others take it to mean actually having sex with animals. Depending on which definition you use in your study, you are going to get vastly different answers. As a result of this very sloppy definition, you can't really say what people are saying yes to in this case. Additionally, social desirability. Furries are pretty renowned for willing to admit a lot of things. Furries aren't shy in the context of surveys and stuff to say these things about themselves. The average person might find it more undesirable to admit these things about themselves. So they may actually be, if anything, higher in these control samples because of this desirability issue, this concern about what others think about them. So as a result, because of these problems that are persistent both in the zoophilia and plushophilia literature, there isn't any evidence to suggest that zoophilia is any higher in the furry fandom than you would find in control samples, and there's definitely not enough evidence here to suggest that furry is defined as a love of plushophilia. And so I'm going to say that these 2 myths are kind of busted. There's a hand. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay, and a hand up there.
Have you ever done any study to quantify how much more honest furries are than the general population?
If I ask you how honest you are, that's a really tough question to take seriously. It's very difficult to sort of get around these issues. There are scales of social desirability. They're long and quite flawed, but it'd be something to look at in the future, yes. So, moving along from that, are male furries gay? The blue bar represents a control sample. This is 800 average Americans. On the left is exclusive heterosexuality. On the right is exclusive homosexuality. 80% of the average American males report being exclusively heterosexual. That bar is a little smaller for the average male furry. Male furries tend to sort of spread all over across the range across bisexuality and exclusive homosexuality. That's sort of across the gamut here. Yeah, they're a little more across all these different things. Yeah, it's sort of quite a mix here. We asked people about their fursonas, and they're not in fursonas, and we tend to find evidence here. So if you notice, this red bar is when you're not in your fursona, and this red bar tends to drop. This blue bar is your fursona sexual orientation, and we tend to find a spike in bisexuality when it comes to your fursona. On average, we tend to find evidence that your fursona is more bisexual than you are. We have a couple of reasons that we think this may be the case, namely that if you're curious about your sexuality, but you're concerned about social desirability, you're concerned about how people might take it, this may be a way to say, I'm not gay, my persona's gay. It's a way of testing the waters, a way of seeing how do people react to this, and it's a way of sort of distancing yourself from the stigmatized identity. Future research will hopefully see whether this hypothesis pans out. Males and females, we tend to find, through the sexual orientation, that males in the fandom, the blue bars, are much more likely to be gay than females are. So there does seem to be some evidence. It's not true that all male furries are exclusively homosexual, but there is some evidence to suggest that on average, furry males are more gay than the control population. This idea, tackling this next myth, the idea that furries are single and sexless. These are people who don't have sex. Again, some evidence to suggest there's a possible bit of truth to this. The blue bars are males, the red bars are females. This left column is, do you identify single? Furry males are about 3 times as likely as furry females to report being single. Furry females are about twice as likely to say that they are dating and, again, to be engaged or to be married. This is part of our hypothesis for why this is the way you get into the fandom. Because the fandom is primarily male-dominated, it may be the case that it's a lot easier for a guy to get into the fandom than it is for a female to get into the fandom. If you're a female looking at the furry fandom, it looks like a big boys' club. There's a lot of guys around, and sometimes you need to find a way to get your foot in the door. Being an artist, knowing a friend who's a furry, or in this case, having a partner who is a furry who gets you into it. This is a hypothesis we're working on, we're testing. We'll see how it pans out in the future, but that's one explanation for why this may be the case. Is it the case that furry males are having less sex than the rest of the population? There was one person who tried to do a study on this, I believe in Australia, and he suggested that furries are actually having less sex than the general population. This is because he failed to take into account gay sex. When you take into account homosexual and heterosexual sexual activity within and outside of established relationships, furries have no more or less sex, there are no more or less physical relationships, and no more or less likely to be in love than the general population. So we can say there's some truth to the idea that furry males are more likely to be single than females in the fandom, but it's not the case that they're any less sexless than the general population. Are furry males effeminate? Are they quite feminine? Is it the case that most furry males are quite effeminate? We asked about gender on a 1 to 5 scale, ranging from male entirely to female entirely. Other is the idea that you reject the notion of a continuum of sexuality or gender between male and female. What you find is that males, the blue bars, tend to report feeling entirely male or predominantly male, and females tend to report being predominantly male or entirely male, or female. Oh, sorry, I wasn't saying something. So we asked about your fursona. Does your fursona differ in gender than you? And we find that 61% of furries say absolutely not. My fursona is the same gender as I am. These right here represent the degree to which you tend to gender bend when it comes to your fursona. Higher numbers mean that your fursona, going right up to completely different gender, the extent to which your fursona is a different gender than you are. We find that females gender bend with their personas more than males do. About 35 to 48% of furries reports at least a 1-point difference on a 5-point scale in their persona's gender from their own. But females, again, are more likely than males to do this. So, if anything, rather than effeminate males, it's actually more like, masculine females. And again, it's not the case that this is the majority. This is actually not the majority of furries who do this. Yes?
Just kind of thinking about it, you mentioned that the fandom's kind of seen as a boys' club. Is there any hypothesis that that may be why they're more likely to gender bend?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. It is possible that females may adopt personas that are more masculine because it is a boys' club. Future research can hopefully test that hypothesis. But yeah. Are furries stigmatized? For those who can't read, furries anonymous, don't ask, don't tell. So are furries stigmatized? So for those who don't know, a stigma is a disapproval of a person or a group by people who say that group is different from their own. So stigma is something negative that a group feels towards another group. And we're asking the question, are furries stigmatized? Because we say this a lot, but is it the case? Because we can point to lots of media examples of when furries have appeared to be stigmatized. CSI episode, this terrible episode of 1,000 Ways to Die, this guy words can't describe. And this, I believe, if I remember right, this is a furry death camp that was set up in Second Life.
Oh.
So, there's media anecdotes, but is there actually evidence to suggest that furries feel stigmatized? The first question, felt prejudice from non-furs. Do you experience prejudice from non-furry people? The further over to the right you are, the more you agree with this. And what you find is that furries tend to be quite high on this. Furries tend to agree with the idea, at least somewhat, that they experience prejudice from non-furries in their life, and from non-furries in general. The red bars, do you think it's socially okay to be furry? Do you think society, approves of you being a furry? And you can see that a lot of furries disagree with the idea that it's okay or acceptable to be a furry in society. Some of this also is reflected in the self-disclosure literature. Do you tell other people if you're a furry? What we find, the blue bars say that furries are much more, so the blue bars are friend, and furries are more likely to tell friends that they are furries, but they're very unlikely to tell their family or people in their day-to-day lives, the red and green bars, that they are in fact furry. This is something that a lot of furries keep to themselves. They play quite close to the chest. Bullying. Compared to non-furries, furries as kids were bullied a lot more, both physically and in terms of teasing. Even after you control for the fact that furries are more likely to be gay, even after you control for age differences or sex differences in our samples, furries were more likely to be bullied as kids. This happened the most during the ages of 11 to 18, which should be noted is a very critical period in a person's identity formation. And across the age group, when you look at furries versus non-furries, furries were more likely to be bullied up until the age of 25 and over, when this was not a statistically significant difference. I think there was a question back there.
Yeah, have you compared to like role-playing game fandom and other fandoms on this one?
We've not yet. We've not yet. But it's on the list of to-do things, yeah. So, but yeah, so we can say compared to the average person, furries do experience more bullying. Compared to members of other fandoms, we're not sure yet. So in summary of the furry stigma stuff, are furries as a group stigmatized? Yes, there's evidence to suggest that furries as a group are individually they both perceive stigmatization from the world around them, and they actually sometimes do experience the stigmatization as well from the world around them. Are furries crazy? For those who can't read, when was the last time you heard for someone else's happiness? Yeah, someone else's happiness. So. Are furries crazy? And is there evidence to suggest that there's some maladjustment or other aspect of the psychology of furries to say that they're maladjusted? This is us asking furries and non-furries their self-esteem. This is not statistically significant difference. This is us asking them about their life satisfaction. This is not a statistically significant difference. This is us asking about the sense of anxiety that they experience in their life. This is a non-statistically significant. With your psychological well-being, with your relationship well-being, but it does positively predict the extent to which you feel a coherent and stable sense of identity. Furries spend a lot of time thinking about who they are as a person compared to the average person. So being a furry is associated with a past history of bullying, but they tend to be doing well psychologically in spite of this. So bullying, which should lead to decrement on all of these things, life satisfaction, relationship problems, doesn't seem to be happening with furries, and part of this may be because furries find this community of like-minded others, a social support network, something that keeps them stable, provides a sense of strength for them. So in conclusion to this talk, the so what here, we still have a lot to study. There's plenty to study here. We're talking about longitudinal studies. We're doing experimental studies for the first time. We're doing an experimental study here at Furry Fiesta, just down the hall there. I'll pin that a little bit. And we're hoping in the future to catch furries as they're leaving the fandom. So these are new studies that we're currently working on developing, and are in various stages of developing. And we have a lot of new hypotheses to test, mainly based on talks like this and the people we talk to afterwards, who generate new ideas for us. They tell us, hey, you guys should look at this. We take a lot of those questions and we answer them, and that's where we get presentations like this. So what we've covered to this point is, what's a furry, what's a furry fandom, what are fursonas and different subcultures. We've looked at debunking some of the myths about furry sexuality, and we have shown evidence, I think, that there is at least a bit of stigma felt towards the furry fandom, but that furries persist in being psychologically well adapted in spite of this. In terms of our research, as I mentioned, all this research and more is available on our website, which you can get from the cards at our table. Our Facebook group that we have, IARP, or Anthropomorphic Research Project, something like that, and go to our table. And the Twitter that I neglect so sadly. Scientific journals, we do publish this in scientific journals, and currently we have a number of papers that are either under review or have been accepted. One that was just accepted is a study that looks at furries as a stigmatized recreational group. This is a study that shows, based on our previous research with conventions, that belonging to furries as a recreational group can actually overcome some of the detrimental effects to well-being and life satisfaction that you would expect from people who belong to a group of people who are stigmatized. So normally that would be bad for you, but if it's a recreational group like furries are, it can actually be a source of strength. We're currently drafting a paper looking at dehumanization and animal rights activism. Namely, if you dehumanize yourself, does it make you more likely to support animal rights? We have a paper that just got submitted for review right now, looking at furries, fan groups, and this idea of global citizenship, identifying not just as a person, but as a citizen of the world. And this leads to a lot of pro-social implications, including things like charities, because furries apparently know a thing or two about charities. The importance of furry in clinical practice. I mentioned this one a little bit, the idea that you need to take into account, if your client is a furry, this is something important that you should probably know about them. We have a draft of paper right now currently being passed around looking at furries and the solidifying or developing of a sense of coherent identity. So these are just a few papers to show you that we are hard at work trying to publish this in an academic realm. Thank you. I don't know what the next panel is in here, or if those are the folks out there who are in the next panel, but until they kick me out, I'm happy to answer.
They were actually listening to the panel.
Okay.
The panel has overflowed into the hallway.
So I guess until they kick me out, anyone who wants to stay afterwards and ask questions, feel free. Once we get kicked out, I will go back to our table, and I'm happy to answer questions there. So, thank you.
Lights,
Lights.